And conversely,
go ahead.
Conversely, that's why the wireless providers are so keen on not having the rules apply to them. They see that as their area of the greatest growth. And both AT&T and Verizon are obviously big players in both the wired and wireless spaces, and their concern about the wireless area is much greater than their concern about wired services.
We have a question from one of the attendees. Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Well, I was just going to add, to a certain extent, the reason why wireless is treated differently is because the constraints on the network are different. You only have a limited amount of spectrum available. So certain services, particularly when you're talking about an IP network, can really overwhelm the network and make it so that my phone calls drop out and I can't access anything on Google or whatever other website I'm trying to reach on my mobile device.
So we've defined it, but one of the things is the role of the FCC. One of the attendees, Casey, asks, isn't a key challenge to this discussion on whether the FCC has authority to regulate the internet? JG,
yes.
Talk about that.
Yeah, that is a central question here. The FCC was rebuffed by the courts in the Comcast case and had to go and look for a new way to justify its authority. And some of you may remember that last summer, the FCC actually asked for comments on whether it should completely reclassify internet service as a telecom service, like telephone, that would be right within the center of its jurisdiction. Ultimately, it decided not to do that, and instead to look at various other provisions of the Communications Act and try to draw authority from that. That general approach has a lot of risks for the FCC, not the least of which is, it looks like they're trying to have a little sleight of hand to some people. That's also engendered a lot of concern in Congress. One of the reasons that the Republican majority in the House is upset with the FCC about network neutrality is a view that the FCC has overstepped its bounds. It's a tricky question from the legal perspective. There are cases that would support the FCC, and there are cases that don't entirely support the FCC. So it's clear the FCC has taken something of a legal risk by going forward this way.
Meg, do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think that the FCC clearly feels that they've got the authority to do what they have to do. I think the Comcast decision, some people are interpreting it a little bit too broadly in terms of the FCC's opinion. But I guess that'll be for the court to decide. There's another issue that's before the FCC right now that Verizon has said that they'll probably sue over, which is they're forcing wireless carriers to roam on data networks, and they're saying that the FCC is also overstepping their authority there too. So I think we're going to see a lot sort of play out in the courts in the next year or so. It'll probably take a little bit longer because the court system takes a little bit longer. But yeah, I think we're going to see some FCC authority issues coming up, and maybe Congress is going to have to get involved and actually establish what is the FCC's authority and their role in all this regulation.
Great. For folks watching, Kat has been having some connection issues, and looks like we're piping her in right now. We've defined net neutrality, and that was the base of this. But for our conversation today, through ONA, for our members, we want to look at the issue of net neutrality and how it applies to us as journalists or as news consumers. Maggie, why should we care about net neutrality?
Oh gosh, to be perfectly honest, I don't think we should. I think as journalists, honestly, this is a technical issue that is turned into a political issue, and I think that if you get a lot of technical folks in the room, that you'll get the service providers agreeing to do certain things, agreeing to keep their networks open. Part of the thing you have to recognize is that we haven't seen a lot of abuse of carriers actually not allowing customers to get to certain content or degrading traffic. And the reason why is because all these providers not only provide like video services, for example, they also provide broadband services. And even though people like to say there's no competition in the U.S. in terms of broadband, the FCC has found that 90% of consumers have at least two choices in their broadband provider. So, you know, if I can't get Netflix on my TV because Time Warner is degrading the traffic, then I'm more likely to subscribe to Verizon DSL instead and get it that way. So, you know, I think that this actually is an issue that's kind of been blown up a bit, that, you know, I don't see it as something that's critical to journalism per se. I mean, I follow it because I cover telecom, and so it's important to me. But
So,
I don't know if other people would agree.
So you're framing in terms of we shouldn't get involved in terms of journalists, and Kat, good timing for your video to come in. You wrote an article for Media Shift about media companies, journalists not being neutral on net neutrality. Talk about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean,
how does it affect journalism, and why should we care?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think the issue is sort of putting it in the context of journalistic advocacy on things like shield laws or FOIA or other things that have to do with our ability to get information for our audiences and transmit information back to our audiences. So I think people's ability to consume content on their wireline devices or their mobile devices does have to do with issues of net neutrality. I was able to listen to a lot of what you guys were saying, even if you guys couldn't see or hear me. So I'm more or less up to speed on what's been said
great.
so far. So yeah, I think to me the big question is, particularly for smaller producers of content, independent producers, smaller newspapers, smaller video producers, if there is a possible future where there's maybe tiered access or privileged prioritized speed for people who are willing to pay a little bit more, what does that mean for the independent content producers and for the people who might want to share information with us as reporters who may or may not have sort of the unfettered access to us that they have now. So, you know, it's sort of the gist of my concerns. But, you know, I think there is sort of an issue about individual journalists taking a stand on any issue of public policy, which is why I think it's an important discussion for ONA to have as to whether ONA as a trade association for online news organizations wants to weigh in on this, and if so, how?
Well, that's one of the questions we're trying to grapple with, and one of the reasons why we're having this discussion. One, to inform our members, and two, you know, to gauge what should we take a stand, should we participate, and how so. But it's also very difficult for some board members because, you know, we work for different companies that are different stakeholders on two different sides of the issue. Go ahead, Maggie, you were going to say something.
I was going to say, you know, I think from ONA's position, I would be very careful in how you take a stand. Because, you know, on the one hand, I do see Kat's point that, you know, I know there's a lot of fear about the network being tiered and people paying for priority. But at the same time, that's already happening. That's already been part of the internet business model and how networks are managed anyway. And to some extent, if there's a market for a service that provides a better quality, then I think that should be a business model that's allowed to, like, for example, this Watch It 2 service is great, but Kat just dropped out, what, like 3 times, right? I mean, if we had a guaranteed level of service, you're going to get a much better quality experience. You know, I'm hearing some loopback myself. You know what I'm saying? Like, the whole experience that we're watching right now would be better. And if people are willing to pay for that, I think that's fine. And I think that is a business model that could thrive if you know, if it's allowed to. I don't think it will necessarily push out all independent players. I think there's a little bit of a misconception there. So, you know, so I think that this is something that ONA should keep its eye on. But again, I don't know if it's something. I feel to a certain degree that a lot of people sort of jump on the bandwagon of saying, you know, I'm a liberal, therefore I love net neutrality, and I don't think it's quite that simple.
Certainly,
Yeah,
just to be clear, that's not what I'm saying.
Please, Kat.
I'm just saying, I'm not saying I'm a liberal and I love net neutrality, just to clarify
No, I'm
where
not saying
coming
you are,
from.
but you know, I feel like, for example, I interviewed, Al Franken on this topic, and
Sure.
I think he has a very similar view, and he's very much pushing the agenda of the independent content developers. But at the same time, when I actually sat down and talked to him, I was really surprised that he has very little knowledge of how the internet actually works. And so I guess that's where my liberal comment came out. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take a jab. I wasn't trying to.
I mean,
Well,
it
go ahead,
interesting. Yeah, it is interesting how this has become polarized as a Republican-Democrat issue on certain levels. I mean, one of the remarkable things about this issue recently was they held the hearing in the House on whether or not they should try to repeal this legislatively, and they had a hard time finding witnesses who were in favor of repeal, even though you would think that that would have been something that would have been something they would have been easy to get witnesses on. And it was really pretty clear it was being driven by the Republicans in leadership in the House, and not so much even by their constituents, which really makes it an unusual issue. They didn't really have anybody who was pushing them to do this, no real evidence that they had a lot of support from their normal constituents. But it's nevertheless very much divided Republican-Democrat.
Is that what you each are finding that are going? This debate is going along party lines. Kat, is that what you're seeing?
I mean,
experience?
my perspective on the issue is much more sort of thinking about the content production and creation side rather than sort of the ins and outs of it on the Hill. It's not what I cover.
Yeah.
So Maggie's probably the better person to answer that question.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I think that it seems pretty political. I mean, and to be honest with you, a year ago, I think it was, I was a moderator for a debate, and it was between someone from CTIA, the Wireless Association, and GSON of
Public Knowledge.
Free Press, right? Public Knowledge, sorry. Yeah. Sorry, Gigi, I get those confused. Anyway, but what was interesting is, like, during the discussion, there seemed to be a lot of areas where both sides agreed to things. And at that point, one of the big sticking points was, how do we define network management? And I said, okay, well, it sounds like you guys agreed in most things. This is just really a matter of getting the wording right, you know, and I'm not a lawyer or somebody in Congress, so, you know, I guess I'm not as detail-oriented as they are, and they're like, oh, no, this is not just about the wording, you know, we have very fundamental disagreements, yada, yada, yada. And then, you know, and to me that said, I got this sense that this is a fight between lawyers and policy people in D.C., and that if you really sat down and you got technical people to look at the issues, I think there would be a way to protect what Kat is worried about, which is allowing independent content owners to get their stuff out on the. I mean, that's what the internet was really made for, in a sense, right? So I think that the politicians are who's kind of getting all of this really. I don't know. I think that it's the politicians are the ones who are getting this all sort of stuck in no man's land.
Folks, I don't know if you hear it, but we're getting an echo. Please check on loopback and check it off again to see if we can reset it. That's been working in the past. So go ahead and check it on and check it off. And that should hopefully reduce the echo a little bit. It seems like it might have.